Yo, pull up a chair, let the real talk begin. Faith on the table where the brothers lock in. Life gets heavy, but we stand our ground. Truth in the room when the circle comes round. No mask, no front, just real man here. Talking about faith through the doubt and the fear. From the grind of the week to the lessons we share. Welcome to the men's round table, pull up a chair. Men's round table series, step inside. Real men, real faith where the truths collide. Voices at the table where the stories get shared. Welcome to the men's round table, pull up a chair.
Welcome back to the Men's Roundtable Series Spotlight. I'm your host, Mr. U. If you're watching for the very first time, thanks for making us part of your week. We're live on Facebook and YouTube. And of course, you can find all of our shows across all social media platforms, as well as all podcast listening platforms. So wherever you get your podcast from, you can find one of our shows. So thanks again for listening and for watching and being a part of the conversation. Today we are, well, first, almost forgot. This show is a sister show to our Men's Roundtable Series podcast, which airs every Thursday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is a panel of men who are talking about men's issues and things that are germane to men. This is a one-on-one version of that show where we talk to husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons from, of course, a male perspective. Today's guest is a coach, an award-winning business owner, and a leading voice at the United Nations on business sustainability. Jody Brooks is here with us. Jody, how are you, man?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Same here. Good to have you here, man. You talk about something that we deal with a lot, especially in the business circles that I work in and I function in, and that's people who are moving from or out of burnout and losing the ability to have clarity and confidence and to live authentically. So you talk about that kind of stuff, you deal with it. So I'm definitely want to flesh that out of you. You even started a framework called the 9 Principles of Authentic Living. Definitely want to get into that as well. So before we do that, kind of tell us real quick where you're from and how you got into this work you're doing with burnout and with business sustainability. How did you get started with all of this?
The business sustainability was kind of what I did in my corporate life, and the getting into coaching, discovering the 9 principles, and now working with people through burnout was through my own messy midlife moment at 47 years of age, where I found myself head in hands in the toilet stall cubicle, depending where you are in the world, in the toilet cubicle, head in hands, sobbing and broken after a meeting. And I just, from that moment there, everything changed. It was my pivotal moment of awareness where I realized and confronted the fact that I was burnt out, that I had pushed myself both emotionally and physically to a point that there was nothing left to give. And so my 9 principles came from my journey back from that moment to a life of purpose and joy. That's a very short snippet of
it's profound. It is short, but it's profound. I love it. I love short and profound, especially on this show, because how long our broadcast lasts. That's great. Tell us if you can kind of crystallize it for our audience. You obviously came back from burnout, obviously. Tell us, what was the first step in your doing that? And when you came from burnout, did that mean leaving the industry or remaining in the industry and kind of working through it in some way? Which is the 2 things were your experience?
So the first, and it's the first of the 9 principles, is awareness. And that was that awareness moment. And I think when you apply awareness to it, for everybody, it's very different. You know, I work with lots of people transitioning from 35 to 65 now, what we would call midlife. And it's very different for everybody. For some people, it is as much as having to leave. For me, it wasn't. It was a transition that I did over a 2-year period from that point in time. But what I learned to do was I learned to manage both those things. And I slowly came back to myself. And in doing that, was able then to transition my way out and find a pathway that led to my purpose. So for everybody, it's entirely different and it's very unique. So I would never say to anybody, if you have that moment, hand in your notice and leave. But at the same time, I wouldn't also say stay put if it's completely breaking you. It's very much down to the individual and where they're going to head eventually.
Yeah, I was in a very stressful corporate slash government job. I mean, it's the government, so you can kind of imagine what I had to deal with. And I was high up in management, so the responsibilities were massive. And honestly, a combination of doing something that I didn't find enjoyable. It didn't kind of fit who I was as a person, and then knowing that entrepreneurship was where I was supposed to be. So a combination of those things made a really ugly cocktail for me of burnout. And when I left, I could not go back. There was no way for me. There was not a path for me to go back into that world. Seeing what I saw behind the curtain and recognizing where I was in the whole big picture. I love the idea of protecting your peace. For you, how do you help people set boundaries that actually stick? Because right now we're in a time where people are afraid to say no and don't see no as a complete sentence. Tell us how you help people set boundaries that actually don't fade away under some pressure. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to being really, really clear on what your purpose is and where you're going. And that is all linked into your core values. So for me, after the moment of understanding and that moment of awareness, I then really asked myself why and started to understand why I was experiencing these things. What was it that I, why did I feel the way I felt? And behind that were my values. And your values are key to you having your boundaries because they are your core needs. So for me, for instance, one of my values is integrity, another one is justice. And so I then was able to navigate and say no. And that's the thing that I say to clients now when I'm working with them. When you are really connected to your values, the who you are at your core, then it's very easy to say no to things that are not for you and to say it without there being any guilt
Mm,
because you also know that, for me to be in a situation that lacks integrity or justice, I know that that situation's not going to work out very well for either of the people, me or the other person. And
makes sense.
so for me to turn up authentically and to be honest and stand by that, it becomes much clearer to have a boundary. The other thing that I would say about boundaries is we see boundaries as such hard and fast things, and it's very much a buzzword these days, like
Yeah, it is.
boundaries. And a lot of people, I think, struggle with them because we see them almost as kind of some kind of fortress or wall or fence that we put up about keeping people out. And I think the key thing to understand about boundaries is they're actually about letting people in, but they're about letting people in the right terms. And I think when you start to frame boundaries in that context, they become a bit easier because you understand that they're actually about allowing people in, but allowing them in safely and securely for both you and the other person. And that can be your job, your colleagues, your managers, etc. Next thing about boundaries, they're all very different. We have some boundaries that I say to people are here. Like there are some boundaries for me that are this close, but there are some boundaries that are a bit further away from me.
Sure,
And
sure.
and those boundaries also have gates on them. Like they have an entry system. I almost say it's a bit like when you travel somewhere and you go to the airport and you have to go through immigration and you have to prove that you're okay to be there. And so, I always think again, we say the same thing there. Immigration is about keeping people out, but it's actually about letting people in, but letting people in on the right terms. And so boundaries are your own border control and they're about letting people in on the right terms. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Which is a fantastic answer. You talked about your 9 principles. I love to ask this question to our guests that come in that have a framework like this. Which of the 9 principles, and you can name them really briefly if you'd like to, but which of the 9 principles was the one that you found the hardest to master?
I think that so they spell the word authentic.
Okay.
It was a gift given, depending on your spirituality and your faith, but for me, it was a gift given from God. And the first one is awareness. The second one is understanding. The third is trust. The fourth is honesty. Then empowerment. Then nurture. then transformation, then integrity, and then compassion. I
I
would
love it.
say that, and they go in a family of three. They're three threes. And the first set of three, awareness, understanding, and trust, I call the pause phase. And when I work with clients, this is the point where we pause, and we're not concerned about a forward direction. We're concerned about sitting in the moment. The one thing that strikes fear into everybody that sits in a session with me is the fact that I ask them to sit still and say nothing for 5 minutes. And that's very hard for people because we live in a world where we're supposed to be constantly distracted. And I think that that's why the pause phase is the hardest phase, because this whole process is very new to people. And so for me, it certainly was awareness and then understanding, like taking myself apart and understanding my core values. And in that, there was a lot of having to look back over my life, revisit childhood trauma, revisit poor mental health. And so, yeah, but it was very liberating. And the final one, trust, is where we learn to trust that inner voice again. We're so tuned to the voices outside of ourselves that we lose trust in our voice and in our gut reaction and in our emotions and that gut feeling. And, in trust is where I work with clients to overcome imposter syndrome and self-doubt and self-saboteur and all of those things. So that first phase, awareness, understanding, and trust, there's a lot of hardcore work in that. And I think after that, it begins to pick up pace and people really begin to see the transformation and the change once you move into the next three principles, which are plan. And that's about, kind of where do you go now? Pause is about understanding where you're starting. It's your starting location. And plan is about where's your destination going to be. And then the final three are protect. And they are about boundaries and protecting the work that you've done and honoring your journey. I suppose maybe the last one people find hard as well, which is compassion. And it's not compassion externally, it's self-compassion. And that is the one that people really struggle with. I do a very beautiful exercise. It's something I discovered myself, and I do it with every client at the end of their journey. And I get them to write a letter of forgiveness to themselves, because often we live in a world where we spend a lot of time forgiving other people and we forget to forgive ourselves, and we're often hardest on ourselves. And even around the situations that we may have forgiven other people for. And so I get them to write a letter of forgiveness. And it's something I did. I wrote a letter of forgiveness because I realized the one person I'd never forgiven was me for lots of different things. And I get them to put it in an envelope, and I get them to write their address and their name on it and put a stamp on it. And I get them to post it to themselves, and it arrives through the mail. And then they read the letter aloud from themselves to themselves. It's a very beautiful thing. And it definitely was, and still is with everybody, such a healing process to get to the end of that journey and forgive yourself and move forward.
I love it. We got time for a couple more questions. I definitely want to get some things from you in regards to these. As men, and this is something we deal with on all of our men's podcasts and shows just like this one, we talk about the man who's on a journey to success, who is bearing the high performance armor, but instead of taking off the armor like most warriors will do, they leave theirs on all the time in every other setting, family, relationships, community, everywhere. And they find themselves unable to carry the weight anymore. And they wonder why they're feeling what they're feeling. You talked about midlife being a calling more than a crisis. I'd love for you to kind of speak to the men that are watching, listening to this show about that high performance armor and dealing with all of the things of depression, the things that are isolation for men. How would you encourage men to, no fancy formula, just how would you encourage men to look at that thing face to face and say, you know what, I got to move in this direction. I got to move forward. I can't stay here. Is there something you say to the men that you help coach that kind of falls in line with this?
Yeah, I think I'm always asked the same questions of people, and particularly in a world where we're so driven externally, and quite often that's what happens in midlife. I often say that it's almost as though your physical body went down a different road to your soul, and they become so far apart that that's really why it hurts. And the that external success that people are chasing to try and fill the void often makes the void bigger. Success and happiness are two very different things. And so the question that I always ask people is, this success on your list of the things that you say will make you successful, which of those will make you happy? And quite often it's a question that gets silence, because the new car will make you happy for the first 24 hours, but then it's not a new car anymore. And so will the house, and so will all of those things. But the interesting thing is that we see success as a destination ahead of us. But the real joy is the fact that happiness is a destination that we can all access now. You don't have to travel to happiness. You can create happiness in that moment. And that's why I say it's a calling to connect. It's a calling to come back to yourself and feed your soul and truly give yourself the things that you're crying out for. And they don't lie in the complex external things of success that we often think they do.
I love it. We got Jody's website up on the screen for those that are watching and listening to this broadcast today. Authentic Coaching, no spaces, .me. AuthenticCoach.me. And of course, if you want to follow us, our YouTube channel is up on the screen. We would love for you to support us, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Even for you, Jody, we'd love for you to do that. Be a part of the conversation, be a part of the growth that's taking place there. We'd love to help there.
I will do.
Helps us to put out more amazing content like this episode with you on it as well. So final question for you, and we'll close the broadcast out today. I am positive that there are men and actually even women as well who are on this in the chat and in the comment section, listen to this episode, or they will on replay. The issues of self-worth and childhood trauma are so real. From a male perspective, because that's who our audience primarily is for this particular show, I'd like you to speak to the childhood trauma, the father womb. How would you encourage them? Speak to those men who may not be where you are, who may not have experienced the fullness of what you went through and have overcome yet. What would you say to them as we close the broadcast out today? Go ahead.
I think that the past is the past, and it doesn't make it any less painful, but it is in the past, and it can only hurt you in the now if you choose to allow it to. And in that is being honest about the trauma. I think we often as well feel guilty, or we often minimize trauma. I think for a lot of people, we see such horrific things in the world. And so therefore, our way to cope is to minimize our trauma and sometimes pretend it didn't happen. And that's certainly a large part of what I did. Is I thought that there were people that were much worse off. Their trauma was much worse than mine. What right did I have to say that I experienced trauma? But if you were unhappy, if you were impacted negatively, then that is a trauma, and that has an impact, and you are allowed that, and it's as unique as you are. And but the thing to remember is that it only exists in that past. And the greatest thing you can do is talk about it, share it, confront it, because in doing that, you begin to let go of it. Because there's two things about trauma. One is the trauma itself and the damage it causes. But what's much more damaging than the actual trauma is the silence that surrounds it.
I love it. One of the leading voices at the UN on business sustainability, award-winning business owner and coach, Jody Brooks. Thanks for being here, Jody, and for sharing your story and for helping us men look at our lives and look at authentic living differently. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. No, it was a great conversation. Great way to end my day.
Wherever you are and how you're watching this show, or Jody and I on this broadcast, thanks for making us part of your week. We're live on YouTube and Facebook. Of course, follow us there when you get the opportunity. And of course, you can find all of our work across all social media platforms and wherever you get your podcast from. That's Jody. I'm Mr. U. Have a great day. Thanks again for watching and listening and for having a
Men's Roundtable Series, step inside. Real men, real faith, where the truths collide. Voices at the table where the stories get shared. Welcome to the Men's Roundtable, pull up a chair.